the Palestinians in the occupied territories. But the internet is a game changer. It not only makes it easy for the opponents of apartheid to get the real story out to the world, but it also allows Americans to learn the story that the New York Times and the Washington Post have been hiding from them. Over time, this situation may even force those two media institutions to cover the story more accurately themselves. The growing visibility of this issue, though, is not just a function of the internet. It's also due to the fact that the plight of the Palestinians matters greatly to people all across the Arab and Islamic world, and they constantly raise the issue with Westerners. It also matters very much to the influential human rights community, which is naturally critical of Israel's harsh treatment of the Palestinians. It's not surprising that hardline Israelis and their American supporters are now waging a vicious smear campaign against those human rights organizations that criticize Israel. The main problem that Israel's defenders face, however, is that it is impossible to defend apartheid because it is antithetical to core Western values. How does one make a moral case for apartheid, especially in the United States, where democracy is venerated and segregation and racism are routinely condemned? It's hard to imagine the United States having a special relationship with an apartheid state. Indeed, it is hard to imagine the United States having much sympathy for one. It's much easier to imagine the United States strongly opposing that racist state's political system and working hard to change it. Of course, many other countries around the globe would follow suit. This is surely why former Prime Minister Olmert said that going down the apartheid road would be suicidal for Israel. Apartheid is not only morally reprehensible, but it also guarantees that Israel will remain a strategic liability for the United States. President Obama, Vice President Biden, and General David Petraeus all made comments earlier this year which made clear that Israel's colonization of the occupied territories is doing serious damage to American interests in the Middle East. As Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu in March of this year, quote, "This is starting to get dangerous for us. What you're doing here undermines the security of our troops who are fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That endangers us, and it endangers regional peace," end of quote. And again, that was Senator Biden talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And just last month, former President Clinton speculated that the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict provides the impetus for about half of our terrorism problem. This situation will only get worse with time as Israel becomes a full-fledged apartheid state. And as that becomes clear to more and more Americans, there is likely to be serious erosion of support for the Jewish state on strategic grounds alone. Hardline Israelis and their American supporters are aware of these problems, but they are betting that the lobby will defend Israel no matter what, and that its support will be sufficient to allow apartheid Israel to survive. It might seem like a safe bet, since the lobby has played a key role in shielding Israel from American pressure up to now. In fact, one could argue that Israel could not have gotten as far down the apartheid road as it has without the help of organizations like AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League. But that strategy, I believe, is not likely to work over the long run. The problem with depending on the lobby for protection is that most American Jews will not back Israel if it becomes a full-fledged apartheid state. Indeed, many of them are likely to criticize Israel and support calls for making Israel a legitimate democracy. That is obviously not the case now, but there are good reasons to think that a marked shift in the American Jewish community's thinking about Israel is in the offing. This is not to deny that there will be some diehards who defend apartheid Israel, but their ranks will be thin, and it will be widely apparent that they are out of step with core American values. Let me elaborate. American Jews who care deeply about Israel can be divided into three broad categories. The first two are what I call righteous Jews and the New Afrikaners, which are clearly definable groups that think about Israel and where it is headed in fundamentally different ways. The third and largest group is comprised of those Jews who care a lot about Israel, but do not have clear-cut views on how to think about Greater Israel and apartheid. Let's call this group the Great Ambivalent Middle. Righteous Jews have a powerful attachment to core liberal values. They believe that individual rights matter greatly and that they are universal, which means that they apply equally to Jews and Palestinians. They could never support an apartheid Israel. They also understand that the Palestinians paid an enormous price to make it possible to create Israel in 1948. Moreover, they recognize the pain and suffering that Israel has inflicted on the Palestinians in the occupied territories since 1967. Finally, most righteous Jews believe that the Palestinians deserve a viable state of their own, just as the Jews deserve a viable state of their own. In essence, they believe that self-determination applies to Palestinians as well as Jews, and that the two-state solution is the best way to achieve that end. Some righteous Jews, however, do favor a democratic binational state over the two-state solution. To give you a better sense of what I mean when I use the term righteous Jews, let me give you some names of people and organizations that I would put in this category. The list would include Noam Chomsky, Roger Cohen, who writes for the New York Times, Richard Falk, Norman Finkelstein, the late Tony Judd, Tony Karon, Naomi Klein, M.J. Rosenberg, Sarah Roy, Rabbi Michael Lerner, and Philip Weiss of Mondo Weiss fame, just to name a few. I would also include many of the individuals associated with J Street and everyone associated with Jewish Voice for Peace. I would also include distinguished international figures such as Judge Richard Goldstone, and furthermore I would apply the label to many American Jews who work for different human rights organizations such as Kenneth Roth of Human Rights Watch. On the other side, we have the New Afrikaners, who will support Israel even if it is an apartheid state. These are individuals who will back Israel no matter what it does, because they have blind loyalty to the Jewish state. This is not to say that the New Afrikaners think that apartheid is an attractive or desirable political system, because I am sure that many of them do not. Surely some of them favor a two-state solution, and some of them probably have a serious commitment to liberal values. The key point, however, is that they have an even deeper commitment to supporting Israel unreservedly. The New Afrikaners will, of course, try to come up with clever arguments to convince themselves and others that Israel is really not an apartheid state, and that those who say it are anti-Semites. We are all familiar with this strategy. I would classify most of the individuals who head the Israel lobby's major organizations as New Afrikaners. This list would include Abe Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League, David Harris of the American Jewish Committee, Malcolm Hohenlein of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Ronald Lauder of the World Jewish Congress, and Morton Klein of the Zionist Organization of America. I would also include businessmen like Sheldon Adelson, Lester Crown, and Mortimer Zuckerman, as well as media personalities like Fred Hyatt and Charles Krauthammer of the Washington Post, Bret Stephens of the Wall Street Journal, and Martin Peretz of the New Republic. It would be easy to add many more names to the list. The key to determining whether the lobby can protect apartheid Israel over the long run is whether the great ambivalent middle sides with the New Afrikaners or the righteous Jews. The New Afrikaners have to win that fight decisively for Greater Israel to survive as a racist state. There's no question that the present balance of power favors the New Afrikaners. When push comes to shove on issues relating to Israel, the hardliners today invariably get most of those Jews who care a lot about Israel to side with them. The righteous Jews, on the other hand, hold considerably less sway with the great ambivalent